Most gardeners are making a costly mistake right now. Not by doing something wrong, but by doing nothing at all. Welcome back to Roots and Garden Secrets. What I am about to share is something most gardening content completely skips over, and it may be the most important thing you learn about hydrangeas all year. Take a look at your hydrangea right now. The blooms have faded. The leaves droop by mid-afternoon. The whole plant looks done for the season. So naturally, you move on. And that is exactly the mistake. Because while that plant looks exhausted on the outside, something remarkable is happening on the inside. Right now, in August, your hydrangea is quietly building every single flower you will see next June. What happens to that plant over the next few weeks will determine whether your garden is covered in blooms or nothing but green leaves 10 months from now. Millions of American gardeners have watched a perfectly healthy hydrangea produce absolutely nothing come spring. No flowers, not a single one, and nobody could explain why. That mystery ends today. In this video, I will walk you through what is actually happening inside your plant right now. 4 things you need to do this month, and 1 thing you must never do, no matter how tempting it feels. Remember this one sentence. In August, you are not caring for this year's plant. You are paying for next year's flowers. If this kind of honest gardening knowledge is what you come here for, hit that like button and subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets. Now let us get into it. To understand why August matters so much, you need to understand something about how hydrangeas actually work, because it is not the way most people think. The 3 most common hydrangeas grown in American gardens, the big leaf, the mountain, and the oak leaf, do not form their flower buds in spring. They form them right now, in late summer, on the stems that grew earlier this season. That is the fact that changes everything. Spring does not create next year's flowers. August does. Here is exactly where those buds form. Look closely at any healthy stem on your plant, right at the joint where a leaf meets the branch. There is a tiny swelling tucked into that junction. That is next June's flower, and it is already there. You cannot see it with the naked eye. There is nothing visible to tell you it exists. But it is forming right now. And what happens to that plant over the next few weeks will determine whether that bud survives all the way to spring or simply disappears. Here is what most gardening content never tells you. When that bud begins to form, the cells inside it go through a biological process of closing off their communication channels, essentially sealing themselves to protect their stored nutrients through the long, cold months ahead. It is a self-preservation system built by millions of years of evolution. But that system requires something from the plant to complete itself. It requires consistent moisture and stable conditions during the exact window when the sealing is happening. If the plant runs dry or suffers from heat stress during this period, that protective process breaks down before it finishes. And a bud that cannot complete its formation does not produce fewer flowers next year. It produces none at all. Not a smaller display. 0. That is the answer to the mystery so many of you have lived through. You had 2 spectacular seasons, then 1 spring where a perfectly healthy plant, full of green growth, gave you absolutely nothing. You looked at it, you watered it in spring, you waited, and it just sat there, lush and leafy and completely flowerless. Go back and look at the summer before that empty spring. I would bet it was hot. I would bet it was dry. And I would bet nobody was paying close attention to that plant in August, because the flowers were already gone and it seemed like the season was finished. The cause and the consequence are separated by 10 months. That gap is exactly why almost nobody ever connects them. And that gap is why what you do in your garden this month is the most important gardening decision you will make all year. Now that you understand the why, let us talk about the how. Because knowing is only half of it. The other half is what you actually do starting today. Let me start with the single most important thing you can do for your hydrangea this month. And it is the simplest thing in the world. Water it like next June depends on it. Because it genuinely does. To understand why watering matters so much right now, you need to know something about how this plant is built. A hydrangea does not have a deep taproot quietly pulling moisture from 2 feet underground the way some shrubs do. Its entire root system is shallow and fibrous, sitting in the very top layer of your soil. And that top layer, anywhere from the surface down to about 6 to 8 inches deep, is the exact layer that dries out the fastest and gets hit the hardest by August heat. That is why a hydrangea can look perfectly healthy at 9 in the morning and be completely flat on its face by 3 in the afternoon. The roots are living in the driest real estate in your entire garden. So here are the numbers, and they are straightforward. In normal summer conditions, your hydrangea needs about 1 inch of water per week. During a genuine heat wave or extended dry spell, push that to 2 inches. But here is what matters more than the amount: how you deliver it. You want to water deeply 2 to 3 times a week, rather than giving it a light sprinkle every single day. Your goal each time is to moisten the soil to a depth of about 6 to 8 inches. That depth is where the roots need to be encouraged to grow. The reason deep watering beats frequent shallow watering comes down to root behavior. When you water lightly every day, you wet only the top inch or so of soil, and the roots follow that moisture upward. Over time, you have trained an already shallow-rooted plant to become even shallower. Now, it cannot survive 2 days without you. Deep watering does the opposite. It pulls roots downward into soil that holds moisture longer and stays cooler. And it builds a plant that can handle a hot week without falling apart. On technique, always water at the base of the plant, directly into the soil, never over the top of the foliage. Wet leaves in warm, humid weather create the exact conditions that fungal diseases like botrytis and leaf spot need to take hold. Water in the early morning when you can, so moisture soaks down to the roots before the midday heat has a chance to evaporate it. If you want to take yourself out of the equation entirely, a soaker hose laid at the base of the plant is one of the best investments you can make. Slow water soaks in, fast water runs off. Now here is the test that will save you from overreacting on hot days, because hydrangeas are dramatic, and they will fool you constantly. When you see your plant wilting in the afternoon, your first instinct is to grab the hose immediately. But afternoon wilting is often just the plant losing water through its leaves faster than the roots can resupply it. It is a normal physiological response to summer heat, and the plant recovers on its own once the sun goes down. So do not judge by the afternoon, judge by the morning. Check your plant at 8 in the morning after a full cool night to recover. If it is standing up straight and firm, it is fine. If it is still drooping at that hour, that plant is genuinely thirsty and needs water today. Back that up by pressing your finger 2 inches into the soil at the base. Dry down there means water deeply. Damp means walk away. That finger test, combined with the morning check, is the entire practice. Simple and completely reliable. One more thing for anyone growing hydrangeas in containers. Everything I just said about a schedule goes out the window. Pots dry out dramatically faster than garden soil, and in real August heat, a potted hydrangea may need water every single day. Do not follow a fixed schedule with containers. Check the soil daily with your finger and water until you see it running clearly from the drainage holes at the bottom. And never let that pot sit in a saucer of standing water. Now I need to talk about something that might be the most destructive thing a well-meaning gardener does to a hydrangea. And August is exactly when it happens. I am talking about pruning. Put the shears down. I mean that. If you have a big leaf, a mountain, or an oak leaf hydrangea, step away from the pruners entirely this month. I know how tempting it is. The spent flower heads have turned brown and papery, and the plant looks untidy. Every instinct you have as a gardener is telling you to clean it up. But here is what you are actually about to do. Remember what we established in the last section. Right now, inside those stems, the buds for next summer's flowers are forming at every leaf node. You cannot see them. There is nothing on that plant to indicate they are there. So you go out with the best intentions, you trim off the ugly brown heads and take a little more off to tidy the shape, and you cut next June's flowers off and drop them on the ground. And because the punishment for that mistake is delayed by 10 months, you will never connect what you did with what happens next spring. Next spring, that plant will come up green and vigorous and completely healthy, and it will give you nothing, and you will blame the winter, or the soil, or bad luck. If you genuinely cannot stand the brown heads and feel you must remove them, there is one rule that keeps you safe. Cut immediately below the spent flower head and stop at the very first pair of healthy green leaves beneath it. Do not go a single node further down. Those tiny bumps sitting at the base of those leaves are next year's buds, and they are already there waiting. If you have a panicle or a smooth hydrangea, you are in a more forgiving position, because those types bloom on new wood that has not formed yet. A cut right now will not cost you next summer's display. But even with those types, August is not the time for a major pruning session. A hard cut this late in the season pushes out soft new growth that will not have enough time to harden before the first frost arrives. Not sure which type you have? Here is a quick way to figure it out. Round, globe-shaped flower clusters in shades of blue or pink almost always mean big leaf. Cone-shaped flower heads that age from white to pink or tan point to panicle. Distinctive leaves, shaped like the lobes of an oak leaf, mean oak leaf. Knowing your type is not just trivia. It is the difference between a garden full of flowers and a season of beautiful green nothing. Now I want to talk about something that catches even the most dedicated gardeners off guard, because the logic behind the mistake feels completely reasonable. Your hydrangea is doing important work right now. It is building next year's flower buds. So the natural conclusion is that you should feed it. Give it a boost. Support all that behind-the-scenes activity with some extra nutrients. Do not do it. Put the fertilizer bag back in the shed and leave it there until spring. Here is exactly why. Nitrogen, which is the primary driver in most fertilizers, does one thing above everything else. It tells a plant to push out new leafy growth. That is its job. And it does that job on every plant in your garden without exception. So when you apply fertilizer in August, you are sending your hydrangea a signal to produce a flush of soft, tender new shoots at the exact moment in the season when it should be doing the opposite. Instead of channeling its energy into hardening its existing stems and sealing those forming buds for winter, the plant redirects everything into producing new growth that has absolutely no future. That soft growth will not have enough time to mature and toughen before the first frost arrives. The cold kills it. Those frost-damaged stems die back over winter. And dead stems do not carry flower buds. Think about what that means in the full picture. You spent the entire last section protecting those developing buds by watering carefully and keeping your pruners away. A single late fertilizer application undoes that effort from a completely different direction. Water builds next year's flowers. Fertilizer in August dismantles them. The right schedule is straightforward. One balanced application in early spring when the plant is waking up and actively growing. That is all it needs. Nothing more after midsummer. And remember this, because it is probably the most expensive misunderstanding in all of hydrangea growing. No fertilizer on any shelf, at any price, can restore a bud that was never made. With feeding handled, let me give you the one thing on this list that keeps working for your plant, even when you are not in the garden. Mulch it. Spread 2 to 3 inches of organic mulch in a wide circle around the base of the plant. In practice, that means laying down a layer roughly as thick as your hand is wide, covering the root zone but keeping it pulled back about 2 inches from the stems themselves. Mulch pressed directly against woody stems holds moisture where you do not want it, and can invite rot over time. That single layer of mulch is quietly doing 3 jobs at once. First, it slows evaporation from the soil surface, which means every deep watering you give that plant lasts significantly longer. Second, it stabilizes soil temperature, keeping those shallow roots cooler during the worst heat of the day. And third, it suppresses the weeds that would otherwise be competing directly with your hydrangea for the water and nutrients you are working to provide. For materials, reach for hardwood bark, composted wood chips, shredded leaves, or clean straw. Skip the dyed decorative mulch and keep it away from the base of the stems. That is the whole practice, and it costs almost nothing. Now here is a bonus that most gardening content never mentions, and it fits perfectly with everything we have talked about today. August is one of the best months of the year to make more hydrangeas for free. I mean completely free, from cuttings you would otherwise leave on the plant. Studies on hydrangea propagation show that softwood cuttings, taken with the right technique, achieve a success rate of 70 to 90%. Those are genuinely good odds for a beginner, and the process is simpler than you might think. Start by selecting a stem that is not carrying a flower. A stem with a bloom is spending its energy on that flower rather than on building roots. Cut a section about 6 inches long, making your cut just below a node, which is the joint where a leaf attaches to the stem. Strip off all the leaves on the lower half of the cutting completely. Then take the 2 leaves remaining at the top and cut each one in half across the middle. That step matters more than it looks. A cutting has no roots yet, and cannot replace what it loses through its leaves. Cutting the leaf area in half keeps that stem from drying out before it ever gets the chance to root. Dip the cut end in rooting hormone powder or gel, which you can find at any Home Depot or Lowe's in the garden section. Push the cutting into a mix of equal parts perlite and peat moss, then cover it loosely with a clear plastic bottle, with the bottom cut off to hold humidity around the new plant. Set it somewhere bright but completely out of direct sun. Direct sun turns that bottle into a small greenhouse and cooks the cutting within an afternoon. Keep the mix lightly moist and give it time. Roots begin forming in 14 to 21 days. To check progress without disturbing anything, give the cutting a very gentle tug. If you feel resistance pulling back, roots have formed, and you are on your way. A healthy hydrangea at a garden center runs around $30. What you just created cost you nothing but a few minutes and a stem you were not using anyway. Everything about August works this way. Nothing you do this month pays you back this month. It all comes later, and it all compounds. Before I wrap up, there is one more thing most hydrangea content completely leaves out, and it is the piece that completes the full picture from August all the way to next June. Everything we covered today, the watering, the pruning, the fertilizer, the mulch, it all protects the buds forming right now. But those buds still have a long road ahead, and the biggest threat is not the coldest night of January. It is the warm spell in late February or early March that fools your plant into breaking dormancy early. New growth emerges. Then a hard frost hits in April, as it so often does across much of the country, and kills every bit of that tender growth overnight. The plant survives. The flowers do not. And once again you are standing in your garden in June, looking at a healthy green shrub with nothing to show. Protecting against that depends on where you live. In USDA zones 3 through 5, after the leaves drop in fall, build a simple cage using chicken wire, fill the inside loosely with dry leaves or straw, and wrap the outside with burlap or frost cloth. Leave it in place until crocuses bloom in your area, one of the most reliable signals that hard frost risk has passed. Remove the covering on a cloudy day so the stems can adjust gradually. In zones 6 and 7, keep your mulch generous through winter, and wrap the plant in burlap when extreme cold is forecast. In zone 8 and warmer, a well-maintained mulch layer is all you need. Here is something worth remembering. You do not need every bud to survive. As few as 3 surviving buds on a big leaf hydrangea are enough to produce a beautiful display the following summer. You are not aiming for perfection. You are just giving those buds a fighting chance, and that chance starts in August. So let me bring it all together. Water deeply, about 1 inch per week in normal heat, and up to 2 inches during a real heat wave. Delivered 2 to 3 times a week at the base, never overhead. Check by the morning droop and the finger test, not the afternoon wilt. Put the pruners away entirely if you have a big leaf, mountain, or oak leaf hydrangea. Stop feeding. No fertilizer restores a bud that was never made. Mulch 2 to 3 inches deep and keep it away from the stems. Protect according to your zone as fall arrives. And if you have a stem to spare this week, take a cutting and start a free plant. I want to close with the thought I keep coming back to every time I work with hydrangeas. This plant does not fail in the season you notice the problem. It fails in the season you stopped paying attention. August looks like the quiet month. The flowers are gone. The plant looks tired. And inside those stems, everything that matters is happening right now. If this video helped you see August differently, share it with someone who has a healthy hydrangea that never blooms. The reason is very likely last August. Drop a comment below and tell me which type you are growing and which of these 4 things you are starting with first. Subscribe to Roots and Garden Secrets for more honest, practical gardening knowledge. I will see you in the next one.